You're nothing without me. That was the moment I realized this wasn't love anymore. I can still hear him saying it, calmly, almost sweetly, like it was a fact I'd forgotten, and he was just doing me the favor of reminding me. That was the moment everything in me cracked. But let me take you back to the beginning. Before the control, before the suffocating silence, before I stopped recognizing my own face in the mirror. I was 24, freshly graduated, and finally feeling like life was opening up to me. I had dreams, big ones. I wanted to work in publishing, live in a studio apartment covered in books and fairy lights, and spend weekends writing poetry in coffee shops. I believed in love, too. The kind of love that lifts you, that supports your dreams, that makes life even brighter. Then came Ethan. He was tall, with warm brown eyes that sparkled when he laughed, and a voice that could talk anyone into anything. He wasn't just charming, he was magnetic. The kind of man who walks into a room and makes you forget what you were talking about. We met at a friend's engagement party. I had just spilled red wine on my own dress, classic me, and he handed me a napkin, joking that at least I had good taste in wine. We talked for hours. I remember thinking, is this what it feels like when your life changes in a single night? Because it did. Or so I thought. He texted me the next morning. Still thinking about that wine spill. Can I take you out for a redo? I laughed out loud. He made me feel seen, special. The way he looked at me, like I was the most fascinating woman in the world, was intoxicating. I fell hard. Fast. Our first few months were like a montage from a rom-com, late-night drives. Breakfast in bed. Flowers sent to my office just because. He asked questions no one had ever asked me before. About my childhood, my fears, my dreams. And he listened, really listened. I told myself this is it. I found him. The one. My friends liked him. My mom said he had kind eyes. My heart? It didn't just flutter. It soared. But then, slowly, quietly, something shifted. It started with a comment. After I told him I was having lunch with an old college friend, Jeremy, someone I'd known for years. Ethan's face clouded. Oh. Jeremy? I mean, I get it. You've known him forever, but do you really think it's appropriate to spend time with guys like that now that we're serious? I laughed. Like what? He gave me that half smile. You know, guys who might have feelings for you. I told him he had nothing to worry about. That Jeremy was practically a brother to me. That I'd never cross that line. Ethan just nodded. I trust you, he said. But his tone was flat. That was the last time I saw Jeremy. And I told myself it was my choice. Because that's what love is, right? Sacrifices? I didn't see the first red flag. Or the second. Or the third. Because when you're in it, when you're wrapped in what feels like love, you don't call it control. You call it caring. Protective. You tell yourself he just loves you too much. That you're lucky to have someone who wants you all to himself. Soon, I wasn't going out as much. Girls' nights became, maybe next time. I started checking my phone constantly to make sure I hadn't missed a text from him. When I didn't reply fast enough, he'd ask, "Where were you?" Sometimes it was playful. Sometimes it wasn't. The walls were closing in, but I thought I was building a home. Because here's the thing, abusers don't start with fists or screaming. They start with whispers that make you question your judgment. They wrap their hands around your world, so gently, you don't even notice when they start to squeeze. I was still smiling in pictures. Still calling it love. But something inside me was already starting to dim. I used to think love felt like butterflies. But with Ethan, love began to feel like walking on a tightrope, with him holding the net, reminding me every day that without him, I would fall. It was subtle at first. He never said I couldn't wear certain clothes. He just made comments. That dress is kind of revealing, don't you think? Or, I just don't want other guys looking at you like that. So I changed. I started dressing down, wearing looser tops, darker colors. I told myself I was just evolving, that maybe I was growing up. I didn't realize I was shrinking to fit into the shape of what he found acceptable. He told me once, "I love how low maintenance you are. You're not like other girls, always needing attention." At the time, it sounded like a compliment. So I stopped sharing the poems I wrote. I stopped talking about my goals. I didn't want to seem too ambitious, too emotional, too anything. It didn't feel like a cage yet. It felt like compromise. Then the rules started to pile up. He didn't like my coworker Rachel because he said she was too wild. So I stopped going to happy hour with her. He didn't like that I followed certain people on Instagram. What's the point of following guys you barely know? He asked. So I unfollowed them. When I landed an interview at a boutique publishing house downtown, a dream opportunity, he barely smiled. That's a long commute. And late hours. I mean, if we're going to move in together soon, don't you want something more stable? Closer to home. Closer to him is what he meant. I turned down the second interview. Told myself there'd be other jobs. He brought me coffee in the mornings. Tucked my hair behind my ear like he was worshipping me. Told me I was the best thing that ever happened to him. And still, I was disappearing. My best friend, Kara, called me one night. I hadn't seen her in weeks. We miss you, she said. You're always busy now. Is everything okay? Elite. Yeah, I've just been so wrapped up in work. And Ethan, you know how it is in the beginning. She was quiet for a moment. But it's not the beginning anymore, Em. I didn't know what to say. So I changed the subject. We didn't talk again for months. Ethan didn't scream. He didn't hit. He didn't throw things. He just watched. Watched my phone when I picked it up. Watched the clock when I was 5 minutes late. Watched my expressions, my tone of voice, my reactions, like he was cataloging everything. And if something seemed off, I just want to understand why you're acting weird. I feel like you don't love me the way you used to. Are you sure you're not hiding something? I'd end up crying, then apologizing, even when I didn't know what I was sorry for. It felt like I was always almost in trouble. Like being loved by him was a test I had to keep passing. Sometimes I'd look at couples in the park or see girls laughing with their friends and wonder, is this what normal feels like? Because I couldn't remember. But then he'd show up with flowers. Or surprise me with my favorite takeout. Or send a voice memo that said, I can't believe I get to love someone like you. And I'd melt. Every time. Because when someone breaks you down in pieces, they also get to be the one who puts you back together. At least, that's what I told myself. But deep inside, under the guilt, under the confusion, under the performance of being lucky, a question was forming, a quiet, terrified whisper I wasn't ready to hear yet. What if this isn't love at all? It's strange how quickly you can start apologizing for things that shouldn't need apologies. Like wanting to call your mom. Like being quiet because you're tired. Like laughing a little too hard at a joke someone else made. I became a master of apology. I said sorry so often that it didn't even sound like a word anymore. It was just background noise to my life with Ethan. Sorry I took too long at the store. Sorry, I should have texted you sooner. Sorry I didn't notice you were upset. At some point, I even caught myself whispering, sorry, under my breath when I stubbed my toe. Like I needed permission to be in pain. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't rage. But his disappointment was a slow, unbearable weight. Like walking through fog that only got thicker the more I tried to explain myself. He had this way of going silent, just enough to make me feel the absence of his attention like a punishment. He'd look at his phone, scroll through social media, glance at the TV, but not at me. I would beg for his forgiveness, without knowing what I had done. That kind of silence? It's not peaceful. It's a message. You hurt me. You failed me. You better fix it. I remember one night, we were supposed to go to his cousin's birthday party. I was excited to wear this pale blue dress I hadn't worn in months. I did my hair, my makeup, even curled my lashes the way he liked. When I stepped out of the bedroom, he looked up from the couch and said, "Is that what you're wearing?" That's all it took. My stomach dropped. I stood there frozen, heat crawling up my neck. What's wrong with it? I asked, my voice too soft. He shrugged. It's just tight. You don't need to try so hard. I thought you were past that. I turned around and changed. We never even made it to the party. He said he wasn't feeling social anymore. I sat beside him on the couch all night, trying to be cheerful, but I felt like my insides were bruised. I wanted to tell someone. I wanted to say, this isn't normal. This hurts. This doesn't feel right. But I didn't know how. Because I was still too busy protecting his image. I didn't want my friends to judge him. I didn't want to look like I had made a mistake. I didn't want anyone to say, "I told you so." So I smiled on social media, posted cute couple photos, wrote captions like "my person" and "grateful every day." But behind those photos were 1,000 tiny compromises, 1,000 swallowed words, 1,000 pieces of myself I had quietly set down and forgotten to pick back up. The hardest part? Sometimes I still believed he loved me, because he'd cry when we argued. He'd say, "You don't know how scared I am to lose you." He'd blame his jealousy on his childhood, his exes, his fears. And I'd believe him. I thought I could fix him. I thought my love could make him feel secure, and in return, he'd finally let me breathe. But that's not how control works. It doesn't loosen when you love harder. It tightens. And slowly, I was forgetting what it felt like to just be myself, unwatched, unmeasured, unafraid. I was learning to shrink. I was learning to disappear. And worst of all, I thought that meant I was being a good partner. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I realized I hadn't heard myself laugh in weeks. Not a polite chuckle. Not a forced ha when Ethan said something mildly funny. I mean a real, belly-deep, tear-in-your-eye kind of laugh. It just vanished. Like so many other pieces of me I hadn't noticed slipping away. That day, I was working from home, editing blog posts for a freelance client. I had just wrapped up a piece on how to set boundaries in relationships, of all things. The irony was painful. I sat back in my chair, stared at the ceiling, and suddenly felt like I couldn't breathe. It wasn't a panic attack. Not exactly. But it felt like my body was trying to tell me something my mind refused to hear. I walked into the bathroom and caught my reflection in the mirror. Dark circles. Lips pressed into a straight line. Shoulders curled in like I was trying to disappear into myself. When did I start looking like this? When Ethan got home, I didn't say much. I couldn't. He noticed. "You okay?" he asked, sitting beside me. I nodded. "Just tired." He rubbed my back for a second, then leaned in close and said, "I need you to be my sunshine, babe. When you're off, I feel off. You know." I nodded again, and forced a smile. Later that night, he wanted to be intimate. I didn't. He didn't yell. He didn't force me. But the way he sighed, the way he rolled away from me and pulled the blanket tight around his shoulders, it felt like a punishment, when I was too tired to name. So I whispered, "I'm sorry." And then I gave in, because it felt easier to surrender than to feel him drift further away. That was the night I realized something devastating. I didn't say no anymore. Not to him. Not to anyone. I had forgotten how. Somewhere between, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me," and "You'd be lost without me," I had lost the right to my own voice. I didn't have opinions anymore. Just preferences that matched his. I didn't make choices. I waited for his approval. I didn't exist for myself. I existed through him. The worst part? From the outside, everything looked fine. No one would have believed that I was barely holding on. That I had dreams once. That I used to sing in the car, write short stories at night, dance around in my pajamas for no reason. Ethan had never screamed at me. He had never laid a hand on me. But he had taken something much deeper, my sense of self. And I handed it over, piece by piece, believing I was doing it in the name of love. That's the thing about emotional abuse. It doesn't leave bruises. It leaves silence. It leaves shame. It leaves you in the middle of your own life, feeling like a stranger in a place that once felt like home. And still I stayed. Because I didn't know what else to do. Because I thought maybe I'm the problem. Because I believed that love meant giving everything. Even yourself. But deep down something was shifting. A tiny ember of doubt. A whisper that grew louder each time I cried alone in the shower or stared at my phone, too afraid to text a friend. And one day, that whisper would become a roar. But not yet. Not just yet. I'm fine. That was the lie I repeated so often. It became my truth. My mask. My armor. I said it to my mom when she asked if I was eating enough. I said it to coworkers when I skipped lunch because Ethan didn't like when I spent time with gossipy office girls. I said it to myself in the mirror. Every morning, before I stepped out into the world pretending I had everything together. But I wasn't fine. I was exhausted. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually drained. I wasn't living. I was managing his moods, his expectations, his disappointments. It was like trying to keep a glass tower from collapsing by catching every crack before it spread. He didn't have to isolate me by force. I did it for him. I stopped calling Kara back because I didn't want to explain why Ethan got upset when I hung out with her. I skipped my cousin's bridal shower because it was too far and a waste of gas. I even stopped going to the library near our apartment, my favorite place in the world, because Ethan once said, "It's weird how much time you spend around strangers." I felt guilty for wanting space. Guilty for needing air. Guilty for missing the version of myself I barely remembered. There was one moment that still haunts me. It was a Sunday morning. I woke up early and made pancakes, his favorite. I was humming softly, flipping them on the skillet, when he walked in, looked at me blankly, and said, "You used almond milk? I told you it makes me feel bloated." I blinked. I had forgotten. Just once. I apologized immediately. I said I'd remake them. I told him I'd go to the store right now and get the kind he liked. But he didn't respond. He just walked away. And I stood there, spatula in hand, pancakes burning, chest tight, eyes wet. Not because of the almond milk, but because I had become someone who would cry over almond milk. That's when it hit me. This is not love. This is compliance. This is walking on eggshells. This is erasing yourself for someone else's comfort. This is emotional obedience disguised as romance. I didn't want this life. But I didn't know how to leave it either. Where would I go? I had distanced myself from everyone who could help. I had turned down job opportunities. I had built my world around him. That's how they trap you. Not with chains. With love bombs, guilt trips, and quiet ultimatums. With just enough warmth to keep you questioning your cold. I wasn't ready to walk away, not yet. But something in me had stirred. And once something stirs, it never quite settles again. It was just a text. One message. But it hit me like a bolt of lightning through my ribs. It was from Kara. After months of silence. "I don't know what's going on, but I miss you. The real you. If you ever need anything, I'm here. No questions. No judgment. Just love." I stared at the screen, and something in me cracked open. Not a dramatic sob or a breakdown. Just stillness. Like the first breath after being underwater too long. Because I realized something heartbreaking. She noticed I was gone. Even when I didn't. For a second, I could feel myself. The me before Ethan. The one who laughed loudly in diners. The one who danced barefoot in the kitchen. The one who didn't ask for permission to exist. I didn't respond right away. I didn't know how to. But that message stayed in my pocket like a secret escape route I hadn't dared to believe existed. That night, I brought it up casually. "Kara texted me." Ethan didn't even look up from his phone. "What does she want?" "She said she misses me." He shrugged. "She was always a bad influence." I waited for him to say more. Maybe ask if I wanted to reconnect. Maybe trust me enough to let me choose. But all he said was, "You don't need people like that anymore." And just like that, he moved on to sports scores, some dumb meme, whatever. But I didn't. That moment stuck in me like a thorn. It wasn't about Kara. It was about the ease with which he dismissed anyone who made me feel seen. Anyone who could remind me of the person I used to be. Anyone who might help me realize the cage I was in. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the years I could lose if I stayed. The chances I had already missed. The dreams I had shelved to keep the peace. What would be left of me 5 years from now? Would I even recognize the woman in the mirror? Or worse, would I no longer care? That terrified me more than anything Ethan had ever said. It wasn't the fights. It wasn't the control. It was the emptiness, the slow, invisible erasure of who I was. The next morning, I took a deep breath, grabbed my phone, and did something I hadn't done in almost a year. I texted Kara back. I miss you too.
I'm not okay. Can we talk?
I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over send. And then I pressed it.
Just a small act.
1 second. But it felt like kicking open a window in a burning house. We met at a coffee shop we used to love, Kara and I. It had these creaky wooden floors and mismatched chairs, and it smelled like cinnamon and second chances. When I walked in, my hands were shaking. I had told Ethan I was running errands. My heart pounded like I was doing something wrong, even though deep down I knew this was the rightest thing I had done in a long, long time. Kara saw me before I saw her. She stood up so fast, she nearly knocked over her chair. And then she hugged me. I didn't realize how much I needed that, just a real, wordless, human hug. No conditions.
No judgment. No expectations.
She didn't press me, just waited. I sat down, staring at the foam in my latte like it held the answers. I don't know where to start, I finally said. You don't have to.
Just talk.
So I did. Not all of it.
Not yet.
But enough. I told her how tired I was. How I had stopped writing. How I didn't see my family anymore. How I couldn't remember the last time I made a decision without wondering how Ethan would react. And then I said something that made both of us go still. I don't think he loves me. I think he just wants to own me. Saying it out loud felt like shattering glass in my throat. It hurt, but it also felt like truth. Kara reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her eyes were wet. I've been so scared for you, she whispered. But I didn't know how to help without pushing you further away. I thought love was supposed to feel safe, I said quietly.
It is, she said.
Real love does feel safe.
I sat with that for a while.
Safe. I had confused safety with routine, with predictability, with the absence of screaming. But I didn't feel safe. I felt watched, measured, managed. Kara didn't give me advice that day. She didn't tell me to leave. She just listened, held space for me, let me unravel. When I left the cafe, I had no clear plan.
No Schutzpact.
No lease signed. But I had something I hadn't felt in a long time. Permission. To question.
To feel.
To want more. That night, Ethan noticed something was different. You're quiet, he said. I smiled just a little. Just thinking. He raised an eyebrow. About what? And for the first time, I didn't answer. Because maybe I didn't know him, every part of me anymore. It didn't happen all at once. No dramatic screaming match. No packed bags in the rain. It started quietly, like a door creaking open in a house I thought was locked from the inside. The more I let myself think, really think, the more questions came pouring in. Why do I feel like I'm hiding in my own relationship? Why do I feel guilty for wanting space? Why does love feel like something I have to earn every single day? And then the hardest question of all, if I had a daughter, would I want her to be in a relationship like mine? I froze when that one hit me, because the answer came instantly, and it was a screaming, burning no. I wouldn't want anyone I love to feel this small, this unsure, this invisible. So, why was I allowing it for myself? I started keeping a journal again, just a small notebook I tucked into the back of a drawer. Nothing poetic, just raw thoughts. Scared thoughts. Angry thoughts. He doesn't ask how I'm doing anymore. I cried in the bathroom again today. I don't know if he'd even notice if I left. I started imagining my life without him. Not in a hopeful way, at first. More like a curious experiment. What would I do with my mornings? Who would I call? Where would I live? And then one day, the scariest thought turned into something else entirely. Relief. I imagined waking up and not checking my phone in a panic. I imagined putting on a sundress without hearing a comment about how it was too much. I imagined writing again, calling Kara whenever I wanted, singing in the shower. I imagined breathing. And that's when I knew I was already halfway out the door. Not physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually, I had begun to walk away. Still, I didn't rush. That's the thing about leaving emotionally abusive relationships. It's not just about escape. It's about rebuilding. Because he didn't just take my freedom. He took my certainty. my confidence, my ability to trust my own instincts. And I had to get those back before I could really go. So I started small. I went for walks without telling him. I refollowed a few people on social media. I said, "I'll think about it," instead of "whatever you want." And each time, a little more of me came back.
It was terrifying.
But it was also the most alive I'd felt in years. I became an actress in my own life, smiling,
Nodding.
laughing at the right moments, kissing him goodnight, making his coffee just the way he liked it. But behind my eyes, I was building a map. I started saving money, quietly. Every time I grocery shopped, I'd take out 20 in cash and stash it in a book on my shelf. Funny how much hope can fit between the pages of a novel. I reached out to my cousin Rachel, the one I hadn't seen since I ghosted her bridal shower. I told her the truth, enough of it anyway. I might need a place to stay. Just for a little while. She didn't hesitate. "Say the word," she replied. "My door is open." Even her saying that made my hands shake. Because it meant I was really doing it. Not dreaming. Not journaling. Planning. One afternoon while Ethan was at the gym, I backed up everything important from my laptop. Photos, resumes, old poems I hadn't looked at in years. I put my passport and ID into a tote bag and slid it under the bed. I deleted search history, cleared texts, covered my tracks. Because leaving someone like Ethan isn't just emotional, it's tactical. He never hit me, but I knew enough to sense what he was capable of if he lost control. And that's what this was really about, control. He didn't love me. He possessed me. And I finally saw it for what it was. I didn't feel angry yet. That would come later. What I felt was ready. Ready to stop shrinking. Ready to stop apologizing for needing space. Ready to stop convincing myself that being tolerated was the same as being loved. It wasn't easy. Some mornings I still felt the pull of his voice in my head. "You'll never find someone who understands you like I do. You'll fall apart without me. No one else would love you this much." But his love had teeth. And it bit every time I got too close to freedom. So I stopped listening. Started moving.
Et chose à date.
A Tuesday, 2 weeks out. Rachel would be home. Ethan would be at work. I wouldn't make a scene. I wouldn't leave a note. I would simply go. For the first time in years, I was choosing myself. And even though I was terrified, I had never felt stronger. The morning I left, the sky was gray. No poetic sunrise. No dramatic thunderstorm. Just soft clouds, heavy air, and the quiet ticking of a clock I could no longer ignore. I had rehearsed everything in my head 1,000 times. What I would take. What I would say if I had to say anything. But when the moment came, my hands still trembled. I waited until Ethan left for work. Kissed him on the cheek. Said, "Have a good day." My voice didn't crack. I didn't cry. But the moment the door clicked shut behind him, I collapsed onto the floor. Not because I was unsure, but because holding in that much fear for that long, it had to spill somewhere. I gave myself 5 minutes. That was the deal. 5 minutes to cry. Then move. I grabbed the bag I had packed the night before. Just clothes, documents, chargers, and the little notebook where I had written my truth. I didn't leave a note. I didn't owe one. He would come home to an empty apartment and silence. The same silence he had trained me to live in. I called Rachel from the car. "I'm on my way," I whispered. And when she said, "I'm proud of you," I broke all over again. The drive was only 45 minutes, but it felt like crossing galaxies. Every mile between me and him was like breathing for the first time. Like air finally entering lungs I didn't know had been starving. I expected relief, and it came. But what surprised me more was the grief. Grief for the girl who stayed too long. Grief for the poems I never wrote. The birthdays I skipped. The friendships I abandoned to keep him calm. Grief for the version of me that dimmed her own light so someone else wouldn't feel insecure. At Rachel's place, I showered and slept. For 12 straight hours. And when I woke up, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't free yet. Not completely. Not emotionally. Not legally. But I had done the hardest thing. I had left. I expected a barrage of texts.
Calls. Rage.
Instead, all I got was one message.
Wow.
You really are just like everyone else. No apology. No remorse. Just more control disguised as hurt. But this time, I didn't answer. Because I wasn't that girl anymore. I was someone who had chosen herself. Healing didn't come in a straight line. It came in moments, quiet, tender, often unexpected. Like the first time I woke up without checking my phone, heart racing, wondering if I'd said something wrong the night before. Like standing in the cereal aisle, choosing the brand I liked instead of the one he always insisted on. Like calling Kara on a random Wednesday and laughing, really laughing, until tears rolled down my cheeks. It was awkward at first. Like trying to use muscles that had atrophied from years of silence. I had to relearn how to trust myself. How to say yes and no without guilt. How to want something without needing permission. I went back to therapy. It wasn't easy talking about it, not because I didn't remember, but because I did.
Too well.
I remembered every moment I swallowed my truth to protect his comfort. Every opportunity one declined so I wouldn't outshine him. Every time I traded honesty for peace, and still somehow ended up with neither. But little by little, I started picking up the pieces. I found an old folder of my poems. Read them aloud to myself. Cried at how much life used to live in my voice. I reached out to people I had disappeared from. Some welcomed me back, others had moved on. I respected both. Because this was part of the price. But I also met new people. People who didn't know me as the controlled girl. People who saw my fire and didn't try to dim it. And most importantly, I saw her again. The girl I had buried beneath someone else's insecurities. She was still there. A little bruised. A little cautious. But still me. I stopped calling what we had love. Because it wasn't. Love doesn't isolate you. Love doesn't demand you shrink. Love doesn't punish you for having boundaries. Love doesn't silence your voice and call it peace. I started dreaming again. Not about weddings or white picket fences, but about freedom. Freedom to write, to travel, to feel joy without explaining it. Freedom to exist fully and unapologetically. And I promised myself, with every ounce of strength I had left, that I would never confuse possession with passion again. That I would never trade my voice for anyone's approval. That I would never disappear for the sake of being chosen. Because I already was. By me. It's been over a year since I left. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, expecting to hear his footsteps in the hallway, waiting for the interrogation I once called concern. But then I remember. I'm safe now. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment with too many books and sunlight pouring through the windows. No one critiques what I wear. No one times my grocery trips. No one sighs when I speak my mind. I eat cereal at midnight if I feel like it. I laugh with friends who don't keep score. I write again, not just in journals but poems, essays, and things I never thought I'd have the confidence to share again. Some days are still hard. Healing isn't a one-time decision. It's a practice. A promise I make to myself again and again. But here's what I know now. I was never broken. I was manipulated into believing that love meant obedience. That I had to earn safety. That being loved meant being controlled. But that's not love. Love doesn't demand silence. Love doesn't isolate you from the people who light you up. Love doesn't need to be earned through shrinking or sacrificing your soul. Love cheers for your growth, even when it's not convenient. Love celebrates your voice, even when it's loud. Love respects your space, even when it's scared. Love doesn't make you smaller. Love sets you free. So, if any part of my story sounds like yours, if you've ever felt yourself disappearing in the name of love, if your laughter has grown quiet and your world has grown small, please know you are not alone. You are not crazy. You are not weak. And you are not unlovable. You are survivable. And more than that, you are worthy of a life that feels like home, not a prison. It starts with one decision, one message, one whispered truth, one act of rebellion that says, I deserve better than this. Because you do. You always have. Love doesn't control. Love sets you free. If this story spoke to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below if you've ever been in a relationship that made you question your worth. Subscribe for more real, raw stories that matter. And most importantly, take care of your heart. It's not meant to live in a cage.